It's been so long now, so far we've come, so far, so far. But the frame of thought and time is etched in grey.
So this is the final interview for the Creative Isolation Project, and today I'm pretty lucky to be interviewing Ian Lilburne, songwriter, singer, poet, and of recent times a photographer. He was the founding director of the Perth Artsrage Festival, artistic director, manager of the University of West Australian's centenary celebration Luminous Night. His bio page says that he crafts classical songs in the key of koan, acoustic songs for sensitive souls, and he definitely does that. His lyrics are reflective and poetic, while his musical influences range from the Beatles and Bowie through to the avant-garde pop of Laurie Anderson and John Cale to American minimalism. It was an absolute pleasure, and is an absolute pleasure, to interview Ian today, and I want to thank him for coming today.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you for having me.
Aren't we lucky to be interviewing in this beautiful spot?
It's a lovely gallery. It's beautiful.
So we're interviewing at the Waterwheel Galleries in Bedfordale, which is very fitting for you because the sounds of your beautiful music have echoed these walls several times, I might tell you.
Oh, thank you. Tough.
Bravo.
In this time of suspended time, when we must behave and do very little, we find so much to say. Waving across the room, sitting 3 seats apart, together we fathom the secrets of the heart. What happens matters, how our feelings change, but they never disappear, only rearrange. Walking 3 steps away, sauntering through the park, together we fathom the mysteries of the heart. Blink, blink, dramatic change. This old world seems suddenly strange. It helps to focus our gaze inwardly, to reflect on the constants of life, grow to accept what's going on. Too much for just one song, let the cycle begin. The guests arrive one by one, take turns to sing, waving across the room, walking 3 steps apart. Together we fathom the stories of the heart. Together we fathom the legends of the heart. together they blur. Les légendes du cœur.
Ian has released 2 albums of original material and recently finished his 3rd, Mystery of the Rose. Since 2018, he has worked in collaboration with singer-sound artist Sam Ray. So Ian, working collaboratively, how does that work and what do you find is the best way to work with each other's strengths?
Well, collaboration is very important to me. I think I learned how to do it through my previous career in the arts, because when you're making or working on a major production, you always have to work with lots of people. But my core creative instinct is actually very solitary, of writing songs. So there's a number of collaborations that come into play in it. Working with Sam has been great. We've been singing together, as you said, for about 2 years now, or maybe more, maybe 3 or 4 years. But for the last at least 2.5 years, we've been working very strongly on developing the songs up that recorded on the Mystery of the Rose. She's a really great singer. She's had classical training and jazz training, and it's been her main career for the last, I guess, 25 years. That has been the main focus of her career. So she's a very experienced singer. Working with her, one of the important things about the collaboration is that she really appreciates my songs. She gets where they're coming from, and she likes them. And I think that's an essential ingredient.
So you're saying that you have to have an appreciation of each other's craft,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah, there's an element of that. But with songwriting, I mean, there are so many different songs generally. People have such divergent tastes. And I've worked with, I've played a lot of music with different friends over years. I haven't been a professional musician for much of my life. That's happening more in my retirement years, that I'm moving into the professional realm. And prior to that, I always used to just play with friends. Just sit down and play music on a Sunday afternoon with a group of friends. And that was great. We wrote songs together and had a good time doing that. But there was always a feeling that the sort of music I really had an affinity to was not the same as the music that they had an affinity to. So when we'd play my songs, I'd always get the sense that these guys didn't quite get where I was coming from, and they'd prefer to play a rock and roll song or one of their songs rather than one of mine. And okay, fair enough. You don't want everyone can't like your material. But when you go into a collaboration with someone who gets it and who really likes it, then it becomes, you encourage each other on, instead of getting mild indifference or, yeah, that's okay. You get enthusiasm coming back.
So were you, in regards to your work with Sam, did you advertise for someone, or were you friends first?
We met through working on Luminous Night, actually. I was producing it. Sam's sister is a projection artist, and she was engaged, we engaged her to do a building projection on Winthrop Hall that was telling the history of the university. So her and I worked very closely, Cindy and I worked very closely over the course of a year building this amazing projection. And Sam worked on that as well. I didn't get to meet him much during that process, but afterwards we met, and we realised we had, a friendship developed between her and I, and then we gradually started playing music together and singing. Originally, I was drawn to her because I love playing old classic American songbook songs, and she loved singing that kind of music. So I thought, oh, this is something we might be able to explore. And then it moved on from there and gradually got to the stage where we were singing my material. And I've never been completely confident in my voice. I haven't got a trained voice. I'm more a songwriter who sings his songs. I've got better as the years have gone by, but I'm by no means anywhere near Sam's league of a professional singer.
So you feel that perhaps, because you were saying, we were talking about strengths,
yeah.
So one of her really strong points is her voice.
Yeah.
So do you feel that because she has that strength, that she brings that out in you?
Oh, she has been a wonderful influence on my singing because she's. I've had various singing coaches over the years to want to get better.
So what do you say you're giving to her then?
Well, I'm giving her the songs. Yeah.
Awesome.
And
that's
and
what I mean about the strengths and stuff.
Well, it goes beyond that too, because when I write a song. I look forward to sitting down and playing it to Sam and hearing what she thinks and what she can do with it and where she can take it. And on the Mystery of the Rose CD, there's 3 songs where she takes the lead vocal, and 2 of them I don't even sing at all. One of them I do a distant background. And then there's other songs where there's one song where we sort of spar against each other. I do a couplet, then she does a couplet. So we're singing
I know that one.
Back and forth. And other ones where we blend together. And sometimes she'll just do support vocal and backing vocals. But what she brings to my music is just a wonderful... She can sing in a way that people are going to sit back and go, wow, that's great singing. Whereas I can deliver a song and get the words across and the meaning, and hopefully people will get drawn into the story of the song through my rendition. But I don't claim that I'm going to sing like a Pavarotti or give a wonderful transcendent vocal performance. And so she brings that to it as well. So
collaboration is really, I can hear that if we were talking about a really positive collaboration, that's a really good example of it. Yeah,
it is a good example. And I mean, but the music goes way beyond that, because the way that I work in producing these CDs, the albums, is I work with a professional producer, music producer. And that brings in another whole layer of collaboration.
Well, that was actually my next question.
Oh, okay.
Because the album that you're working on, have finished, but
almost,
because I know you're such a professional, you never really like, is it finished? Is it finished? I think we've all got that habit. It involves various creatives, and one, interestingly enough, was the Armidale Arts Festival artist Kathy Travers.
Oh yeah, Kathy's an old friend.
And how do you, so when you're talking about a group of collectives, creatives, how do you get them together and choose the people you need for such an album such as that? Is it a skills-based experience, or do you feel that you have to have a past experience with them in another way?
Well, it's interesting that it's all of the above. There's no single way to it. I met Kathy Travers on the first Fringe Festival that I worked on, which was back in 1987. She was performing with the Nova Ensemble, and they were performing a piece of Steve Reich music, which I loved Steve Reich, and he was a big influence on The Mystery of the Rose as well. But I met Kathy then, and over the period of time, she knew me as the guy who organises events, and I knew her as a musician. And when I was doing my first CD about 10 years ago, there was a song which had a French flavour, and the producer that I was working with said, "Oh, this sounds to me like it needs an accordion." And I said, Kathy Travers. So I contacted Kathy and invited her to play on it. And at that stage, she didn't realise that I had any musical involvement at all. She just thought of me as the guy who does the events. So she came on board and played the part on that particular song, and then she played at the launch. And then she and I actually, for about a year, toyed with the idea of trying to do work as a duo. And, so every couple of weeks I was coming up to Armidale and playing with her. And we were working through this, building up a repertoire. Now, it came unstuck purely because Kathy had been a professional musician for 40 years and I'd never had that professional training. So the difference there was just so great that it was not going to work as that kind of collaboration. So I learnt a lot from it, and I'm incredibly grateful to her for the experience of working with her. But, and it ran its course. And we
see, that's an interesting thing, because we've just talked about
the positive one.
And then not necessarily because you're not like that. It's not a negative thing, but it was a learning curve.
It was a learning curve, yeah.
Yeah.
But, when we decided not to pursue that project, there was an understanding that if I were to do more recordings or if I were to do one-off concerts, she would always was happy to perform with me.
And how do you choose your producers?
Well, that's one usually where I go for people that I know. The last project was the current project was quite interesting because I started it with one other producer in particular, and there were the two guys that were working closely together, one who was going to be the major producer and the other one who was going to fill in as well. And just before we were about to start with Ernest on the project, he decided that he didn't want to work on the project, so he pulled out. And that was, I respected his decision. I could understand why he didn't fit. He was a person I'd known for a long time, and we had musical connections, but there were musical differences. And I think he'd been weighing it up and thinking, well, it's not going to work as a good mix here. So when he pulled out, I had to look around for another producer, and I eventually settled on Lee Buddle, who I've also known and worked with for a long time, and he's another person who knew me as the guy who organises the events, not as a musician, but he'd heard some of the music that I'd done. And so I approached him, and it turned out to be one of those things where it was absolutely the right thing to do, because Lee has he is a fantastic musician, he is a wonderful producer, and unlike the other people I've worked with, he's got a very, very broad range of musical experience and interest. And he plays jazz, and he's played classical, he's got classical training, he can record rock and roll, he can record folk, he can record classical, he's got the whole range. And even though I'm a self-taught songwriter that basically comes from a folk pop tradition, I've always been fascinated by new musical composers. And so when we got onto this, once Lee and I started talking about the project, I said, look, I want to do lots of different things on it. And it was from that Steve Reich was one of the people that we kept mentioning as being someone who I wanted to try and incorporate those kind of techniques. And Lee was able to do that.
And he would be able to look at, say, for example, a creative that's different from you, and see how you combine really well. And that's the fabulous thing about, again, the collaborative.
Yeah, it is. But the way that works is that, you listen to the music, and the producer, Lee and I would have a conversation, what do we hear with this? And I'd say, well, I hear a flute on this, or a saxophone, or which are instruments that Lee happens to play. We knew we needed to get a bass player. We wanted piano and we wanted accordion, so I approached Kathy. Lee suggested Pete Jevons, who's a fantastic jazz bass player, plays both double bass and electric bass, and he actually teaches at the academy. And so he became the bass player. And then the other musicians were people through the network that we had. We'd say, like, we needed cello, so we had various cello players that we knew that we approached, and we ended up Tristan Parr was able to do it. Tristan Parr. For percussion, instead of going for a drummer, a classic drummer, we went for a percussionist. And percussionists cover not only the drum kits, but they'll do congas, they'll do incidental percussion like metals, vibraphone and marimba. So they're all the range of a classically trained percussionist. And Steve Richter was the person that came forward, was a contact of Lee's, and he came forward and did it.
What I'm hearing is that your album involves so many people, and how long did it take to get all of those people together and then decide, yes, I've got an album? How many songs have you got on that?
There's 15 songs on the album. It started off, I had about 28 songs as the broad selection. Fairly quickly got it down to 17 once I started working with Lee, and then got it back to 15. As far as the collaboration with the musicians, once we worked out who was going to play on, or what we wanted on each song, it was just a matter of booking the people in. Now, we didn't ever have the band together in one sitting. Everyone just came in individually and did their parts, and then the whole comes together in the post-production where you sit down and listen to it and mix it. And that's, I think the first thing we did was getting the guitar down, and then Sam and my vocals, and then built everything else around it. And then at the end, Sam and I went back and redid some of the vocals to make, it's very different singing just to a guitar and singing when you've got the whole band in the background. You get a better vocal performance that way. So that's the detailed process. It has spread over a year, but it could have been done much quicker.
So when do you think it will actually be out?
I'm hoping by Christmas, but the thing is, we're at the very final stage. We had a session a couple of weeks ago where we went in and we thought there's just a few little things to tweak and then we can master it. And the few little things to tweak took the whole day, and we didn't get to the mastering stage.
Sounds like a painting to me.
Yeah, and then Lee has been so busy that I wasn't able to book another session with him for 5 weeks. So I'm hoping we'll get it done next time. Otherwise, it'll be January next year before we do it. But
I feel so lucky because we got to hear the draft and we enjoyed that so much.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I've been hearing it all the way through as it's developing. But there's just fine-tuning it and getting it really down to things like, that horn part's too loud, or that bass part's too soft, or that piano intrudes there. You've got to, all those really fine things to make it as good as it can be. And, I am a perfectionist, and I love going through that process of getting it right.
Well, I'm going to take you back, Ian. Yeah. Back to, and that was actually another one of my questions, because I've got to know you quite well now, and I'm actually thinking about your path in life as a young person, was it always going to be the arts, or were you thinking of something complete? So we're now looking at you as the young person. Why did you go into the arts, and who was the person that encouraged you? Was it school or your parents, or what actually got you into the arts?
Well, it's interesting. The two things that you mentioned were the two things that discouraged me from going to the arts, school and parents. I think, I'm at an age now where I look back over the span of my life and I think, what would I make differently? And when I look back at my life now, I think I should have been a creative from a young age. That's what I'm passionate about. And, whenever I'd sit down with my parents and have they'd say, now, what are you going to do with your life, son? It's, I want to be a writer. And I would get told off that I had to be a lawyer, I had to be a doctor, I had to be, you're having the best education, you've gone to this really good school, you can make something of yourself. Why do you want to waste your life doing that? And it was really beat out of me. But I did well at high school, and I got to university.
So what were you going to do at university?
Well, it was funny because in those days you had to do a year in another faculty before you could go into law. And I was thinking, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's what everyone tells me I've got to be. So I enrolled in the arts faculty. And halfway through the first year, when I was meant to enrol in law, I decided, bugger that, I'm enjoying arts too much. So I didn't enrol, and I just did an arts degree. And then the pressure was on when that finished. What are you going to do? You're going to become a teacher or get a job in the public service? And I did that for a while.
Is that why you went into arts management?
No, the arts management was a funny thing, because what happened was I tried to do those right things and had absolutely zero motivation for it. So I went travelling and then did the overseas trip thing. I'd worked in the public service, I'd saved up some money, I went travelling for a year and a half. I was very lucky. And then when I came back, by that stage my father had retired, and I wanted to make myself a bookcase. I had an idea to make a wooden bookcase, and so my dad and I made it. And a few people liked it, and then people said, could you make me one? So I started doing that, and then gradually, over a period of about 3 years, I spent time just designing and making furniture and working with my retired dad. And it was where we actually developed a very close relationship, because he was retired, he'd always been a weekend potterer in the back shed, and we'd sort of developed this craft thing. And so that got me into that started me on a road toward practical creative things. And I learnt a lot from that about designing and how you design something and plan it and build it. But after a few years of doing that, I found that it wasn't intellectually stimulating enough for me. So I decided that I'd go back to university and do an honours degree in literature, which was the next phase. So I went back and did that, thinking that maybe I would, if I did well, I might sort of go down an academic path. I didn't do that well. I did okay, but I realised that academe wasn't for me.
But you enjoyed words, obviously.
Yeah, I've always loved words. But in the course of that year, I was doing a course in modern theatre, and it was the first year of the York Theatre Festival, and the guy who was my teacher was also involved with that festival. So he got his honours students to put on a play in the York Theatre Festival, and I ended up acting in it, and it was wonderful. I had a great time. And at the end of the year, I was waiting for my results, and I thought, what do I do now while I'm waiting? I thought, I'd like to do some more acting. So I then, by chance, ran into an old mate of mine who had been a teacher at university, who I knew was involved in theatre. And he had a play on the go, so I auditioned for the play. I turned out not to get the part, but I said, well, I haven't got anything on. Do you need a stage manager? And I said, yeah. So I ended up being the stage manager. Now, that play happened to be the opening play of the 1985 Perth Fringe. And by the end of the season, it was only on for 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of a 5-week festival. By the end of the season, I'd got to know all the guys involved with the Fringe, and a job came up where they needed someone to be a liaison person with an Australian or national act who was coming to Perth and part of the Fringe. And so I landed that job. And then after that, I then got onto the board of the Fringe and found that I was good at organising things, and then became... It was funny the way it went, but it ended up with the next festival that was organised, which was 1987. By that stage, I was the guy who was organising the festival. And I didn't plan to do it. I'd planned to set it up to the point, with other people, of course, to the point where we had the funding so that we could hire a professional administrator and they'd run it. But by the time we got the funding, it was so late, and I'd been doing it anyway, that I ended up taking it on. And then from there, I developed a career as an arts events organiser. So I just fell into it.
So that was in the 80s?
Yeah, 80s.
Was that specifically in Perth then?
Yeah, that was in Perth and Fremantle. The first festival that I organised was at the time of the America's Cup.
Now this is an interesting time, and it's wonderful how it's almost like you're preempting my questions, so which is great. You're a great interview. So what was the arts in the 80s like, particularly in regards to the performing arts, because now it's very different from the 80s, isn't it?
Yeah, well, from my experience, I mean, I think I was very lucky, the timing of it. All the way through that was just, it felt to me like I happened to be in the right place at the right time and probably the right person for what was needed in the area that I was working. But I think I was one of the last of the generation of people who found themselves as arts workers who hadn't had professional training as arts workers. I had a BA, which is a fantastic degree for giving you a range of general skills that you can use across your lifetime. And they're very adaptable, but they're not specific.
No.
And there were already courses in arts management at Flinders University, and the Academy of Performing Arts was setting up here, and they were starting to train arts managers. And now anyone who enters the field basically has to go and get a degree first. So from a management side, it's moved. It was really interesting at one point when I actually, later in my career, when I was working in the Arts Funding Agency. It's now called Department of Culture and the Arts, but it's had so many names over the years that, you know, if you name what it was then, it sort of says, oh, you worked there in 1973, because that's what it was called in, or 93 or whatever. But at one stage when I was working there, I looked around at all the people I was working with who were the senior managers within the arts. All of them had BAs, and half of them had been school teachers who'd done their teaching for 3 or 4 years, thought, this is not for me, and they jumped into theatre or visual art, mainly theatre, because to organise a theatre company that you just needed to be a very organised person and have the passion. And that, I think that is the last generation of those people. Now everyone's either come to it via, as I say, specific arts management training, or they've gone back and they've done an MBA and they've moved into arts management.
So do you think that, because I was involved in the arts in the 80s as well, do you think we were really lucky in the 80s?
Well, it was a very dynamic time, and yeah, at the same time that the Fringe was being set up, Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts was set up. Not long after, and growing out of the Fringe, Chrissy Parrott came on the scene and did the Chrissy Parrott Dance Company. We had a vibrant contemporary dance company in WA. There were quite a few organisations like Artemis, which didn't last very long, but
remember that well.
Women's Art Collective that was really crucial for nurturing a lot of very, very important female artists. Country Arts was set up, and a bit later the Blue Room came along, and that started off as the Actors Centre, and it was really a guild for actors, and then it gradually transformed into a performance space and has now become a dynamic thing. All of those organisations sort of emerged over, say, the 5-year period around 1990, before and after. That's when all of those organisations came together. A lot of other theatre companies came and went, Deck Chair Theatre Company, Swire Theatre Company, I worked for them for a while, but then that transformed into Perth Theatre Company, and that's now folded. Black Swan came along, and we had, in theatre, we also had the Hole in the Wall in the State, the WA Theatre Company, which merged to make the State Theatre Company, which also fell over. So there's been a history of a lot of other organisations that came and went.
There's so many, you're naming so many that I just have vivid memories of.
A thing that was ironic about the 80s was, yes, it was the era of Corporate Greed and WA Inc. And one of the politicians who ended up coming unstuck in that was David Parker, who had been the Minister for the Arts. He was the Minister for the Arts. He was the best Minister for the Arts Western Australia has ever had, because he was the one who insisted that all of these new organisations got funding. And what he did was fantastic. He was clearly the best person that has ever had that job. He came unstuck as a politician, but WA owes him a debt of gratitude for the good that he did in setting up PICA and giving the Fringe a go when everyone in the established community said no, and companies like Deck Chair and not Black Swan, that was a bit later, Deck Chair, Perth Theatre Company, the Blue Room to an extent, all of those organisations came out of that era when he was the Minister, and he had this attitude of, it was a bit of entrepreneurial, I guess, but he just wanted new things to happen, and it was really good, yeah.
If you're thinking about the life experiences that all of those things, all of that time frame gave to you, which would you say as a life experience, whether it was an artistic thing or a life thing, what was it that held you back and what was it that brought you forward?
Well, working at the Fringe and at the period where the Fringe changed into the Artsrage Festival, and I worked there from the first festival was 87, so I started in 86, and the last festival that I organised was in 93. And by then the organisation was established as a fairly major alternative arts forum in Perth. And that period of time was fascinating. That was really interesting, working with hundreds, if not 1,000 different artists and multiple projects over 7 festivals. And being in the fortunate position to being at the centre of that. That was a life-defining job. And, I'm very, very pleased, proud as punch, that what I'd worked on in those early years has now turned into Fringe World. And, 30 years later is now the biggest cultural event in WA. I was there at the start. There are people, there's so many people who've worked on it, but it was, that's the, if I look back on the scope of my life, I think, well, that was the most important thing I've done. And that, possibly, I think my whole career as a producer fell out of that. But I didn't have particular ambition after I left there to keep doing it. And I did continue working in the arts for a while, but I didn't have the ambition to work at that pace. And if I look back at it now, what I should have, from a career point of view, what I probably should have done is left Perth then and gone to Melbourne and worked my way through the art scene there. As it happened, when I left there, it just coincided with the period of my parents being fairly elderly and going into the decline. And I wanted to actually, I felt close enough to them that I wanted to be here for that phase of their lives, not be elsewhere. So that was one of the factors that came into it. I don't think there was any other job in Perth that would top what I'd already done. And so I ended up freelancing, and I had an interesting career, but it wasn't at the same pitch. Then I went, and when I was in my early 40s, I had a heart attack, which I think was a consequence of all the stress that you have in working in the arts. And so from that I moved back, and luckily it was a minor heart attack, it wasn't a major one, but it was a wake-up call. And by that stage I'd already started doing some part-time work at the university, and so I just decided that I would focus on that, and I ended up working at the university for about 15 years, organising events for them. And it was a comfortable job. It was nothing, not that challenging, not that stressful. Still organising events, but not arts events as much. And I kept a sort of hand in the arts a bit, but then gradually just got on with life. But I'd always been writing songs all the way through that. I'd been creating music, and when I turned 50, I decided that I'd had enough of working at the university, and I wanted to move back into either the arts or to actually do something creative. And it was at that point that I started working on recording music. And 10, 12 years later, I've now retired completely from the need to do the day jobs, and I just focus on the music.
And you're a pretty modest person. Let me tell you this, because you have extremely strong songwriting skills. Your
thank you.
Ability with narratives is beautiful, and I've listened to your words a lot, and I know that you say that Cohen is one of your influences, and you're influenced by prose fiction.
Mm-hmm. That's what I studied at university.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you first heard Cohen and a few of the people that do influence your songwriting, how did you feel? Well, when did you get the sense that this is, I love doing? When as a creative, when you feel in the flow and you think that writing the songs is where I just feel complete. Was that while you were still doing other things?
Oh yeah, I started playing the guitar. I started playing the piano first. I got into the guitar when I was about 14, so I've been playing guitar for about 50 years. I remember distinctly, before getting on to Cohen, I'm in the fortunate position as well where I have a brother who's 13 years older than me. So when I was 6, he was in 1963, he was 19, and he was into the Beatles and Bob Dylan. So from the age of 6, I was hearing Bob Dylan. Mr. Tambourine Man is my nursery rhyme. And the Beatles all the way through the 60s. As a little kid, I was hearing the Beatles. you know, what sort of grounding is that? The first record that I owned was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And, what a gift is that for, experimental music and the explosion of pop. So that was sort of almost hardwired into my DNA. And also that whole cultural revolution that came out of those, Dylan and the Beatles in the 60s was like part of the milieu that shaped my consciousness. And it sort of blew my parents' world away pretty thoroughly because, they had the misfortune of growing up during the Depression. So they were very focused on just survival and still bearing those scars, whereas, the 60s, it was like, pick what you want and go for it, So there was that kind of thing happening. But I first heard Leonard Cohen when I was about 14, and what happened there was a friend of mine had a brother-in-law who was a DJ, and he had this sampler, CBS sampler record, which they used to put out where they'd have one track by all these different artists. It was basically, they'd give it to the radio stations, they'd go through, oh yeah, we like that guy, let's hear the album. And there was a Leonard Cohen song on it. And as soon as I heard it, I just thought, wow, this is something. It was, it really just hit me. And I just remember that was one of those moments of an awakening of a different kind of musical sensibility, which probably was a continuation of what I'd felt around Bob Dylan, but it was sort of a different gear. And it was a couple of years before I actually got into Cohen in a big way, like owned a couple of albums and started really fathoming what he was on about. But, by the end of high school, I was well and truly into Leonard Cohen. And that suited the sort of introspective, or an aspect of the introspective writing for me. And then there was all the fascinating stuff with literature. Those things filtered through. At different times I've had aspirations to write, and I've written short stories and nearly finished one novel, but not to my satisfaction. But in the course of doing that, I did various creative writing courses and various reading about how you structure stories, as opposed to studying a literary degree where you read the classics and you don't. Now it's more creative oriented, but in the time that I did it, it was more you just sit back and study the classics. The creative writing courses I did give you the practical nuts and bolts about how to build a story. And a lot of those things are ideas that I, at the back of my mind, filtered through the songs. And that's where you can build a short story narrative into a song using the classic techniques of writing a short story.
There's one particular, and tell me which album it is, but there's one particular song that last time that we spoke, you gave me 2 albums, and one was called Ghost.
Yeah.
And the song Ghost really resonated with me.
Okay.
I absolutely loved it.
Okay.
Favourite, definitely.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. It's a special song for me.
Tell me about that song and tell me how did you think of the words first, or was the music?
There's a number of different ways that I write songs, and the most common way is actually I come up with the music first, and if not the whole music, at least a fair chunk of it. Some songs I will have an idea oh, that would be a good idea for a song, and a verse comes to mind, and then I write the words, and then I find the music to fit, or I get the music in my head, and then I have to work it out on the guitar. But usually what happens is I work out a piece of music that seems interesting and develop that to a complete piece. And then in the course of playing it, words start to pop into my head. Sometimes it'll just be wordplay, other times it'll be an image or something, but it's driven by the music, so it has to fit the melody that comes from the music. And Ghosts is a song that got built like that. It was built piecemeal. The first image for it was the opening line of, which was a piece of wordplay, which is so long. I was thinking a bit of that So Long Frank Lloyd Wright and the pun in that about so long as in goodbye and it's been so long. And I twisted that around of like, so long, it's been so long now, so far, we've come so far, so far. I thought, oh, okay, it's an interesting little play on words. And that sort of kicked me off into this whole thing of a conversation about change and time. It was a few years before that, a very close friend of mine had died, and she'd been a special person in my life, a very special friend. Unfortunately, the fact that she died was tragic. It was difficult for me at the time of her dying because it coincided with my marriage falling apart. So I wanted to grieve for her, but I was also going through the lead up to a divorce. So I didn't quite get to grieve as well as I would have liked. And so then I started thinking about her and as a person that I wanted to think about that loss. And so that became another layer to it, which is the whole thing about, in the second verse, you have the character.
That really comes across actually in the song, that there is lots of layers.
Yeah. So that created the second verse, which is the one about wild hair, raven, dark and curling, a wry laugh, piercive, pensive eyes, an A-frame on a road forever changing, a small child without a hand to hold. And this friend had had a dream once about an A-frame house, and that was where the A-frame came. The other two descriptions are from her, and when she died, she had a small daughter. So those all images fitted into that part of the song. And then the idea of a photograph being like seeing a photograph of someone who's passed away who you've had a connection with, and then what is it with that death, and then the image of a ghost is like a hologram, which is a failing hologram flickering in my brain, which is sort of, that was an image of a ghost.
I think that's why I love this song so much, and particularly when first time I heard it, because as a painter you think visually, the words that you were using and the sentences, you could visualise it so well because your words were so strong.
Okay, thank you.
The way that the sentences melded together, but they also kind of, like as you said, they had layers, and that's what's so lovely about the way that you write, because it's all about, as you were saying, you write for the soul, and that's what you touch straight away. And so is that what you try to achieve?
Well, that's what I hope to achieve, but the process, every time you write a song, it's like, not every time, but it's piecing together those various images and finding a way that they cohere and that they make something that touches you.
You see, now you've also started doing photography where imagery, and it's interesting because on social media you always get people commenting on the way that you put this image together. like we're talking about one that you've just done. But how cool is that? That I think that your sense of words that's why your photography is so interesting, because you see that. Do you think about words when you do your imagery?
Yes and no. The photography has come up, like everyone. I've been taking photographs since I was a young person, since I first had a camera when I was a teenager or whatever. But it's become a focus just through COVID. It was purely through that. And it's funny with the photography because there's a couple of layers to it. But the thing which has changed for me is that my eye has reached a point where I can look at something and just think, oh, that's an interesting photo. And it's that it's nothing there's no intellect, there's no words or anything, it's just the play of light on a particular object, whether it be a tree, a building or something, or there's something funny visually funny there. Just that is something that I now
like the juxtaposition that I think I've used that word of the cathedral type building.
Oh yeah, that collage.
Near Royal Perth Hospital.
Yeah, St Mary's Cathedral.
Yeah. And then what was the other building that was right next to it? There was a quite modern building. It was almost...
Well, that's St Mary's now, because they renovated it a few years ago, and they took off the back end and they put on the modern archway. So it's a melding of Gothic and postmodern.
But that's what I like about your photography, is that virtually every week you've taken an image where it's like, oh, this is one world and then there's another world. Yeah. And you do that with your songwriting. So
I think another thing that I did for years was collages. I love doing photographic collages, just getting either postcards or photographs and making a composite image. And I've been doing that since I was a teenager. And that kind of juxtaposition is, it's the thing that postmodernism really picked up on, but modernism was into that as well. A lot of painters and all that whole idea of random connection between disparate things. So there's an element of that, I think, fairly deeply embedded in my DNA. But with the photography, it was purely COVID. I took a few photographs, put them on Facebook, got a few likes, and they thought, oh, I'll take another one. And then I just got into it. And over the course of the last year, my eye has been trained to, I'm getting better at picking images. But then the next phase is the post-production, where you sit down on the computer with the image and you just reframe it and straighten it up and sharpen the colours to make sure that the colours match what the effect was that initially drew me to it. So
I know that we've chatted before about COVID and the pandemic and everything. So moving towards the end of everything now, we're going beyond that, we hope to anyway. What's your beyond? Where do you feel your next steps are?
I've been wanting to finish this CD, and the COVID has delayed that. I think the original plan was that would be ready by about April, and then I had to put the whole project on hold while everything locked down, and also while the finance sorted out, because you didn't know what you were going to be facing. And then since I've been back doing it, I've had an illness which delayed it again, and so I want to finish that, and then the next phase for me is I want to put that out in the world. I want to see how far I can push that, because I'm very pleased with it. I think it's something that has got traction, and the comments that you've made about your enjoyment of it is really encouraging, and makes me think, yeah, this might have traction. So I want to push that.
We've had people in the gallery come in and hear it and say, "Oh, what's that?" So,
well, I think when it's ready to be sold, I'll have them here in the gallery to sell.
We might even be lucky enough to have you strumming in the gallery.
I'd love to do that, but I call myself a songwriter-singer. Now, obviously, I'm going to have to go out and perform to promote and sell the CD. The music industry is completely different to how it was, even 20, 25 years ago. Now, in the old days, people used to perform to sell CDs. Now people put out CDs to promote their concerts because you make the money through the performance. So invariably, I'm going to have to perform. Sam and I have, Sam has also been through a complex year. She's been studying, so she's coming to the end of a degree that she's doing. So she hasn't had as much time. Next year, her time's freed up. So the plan is that we're going to start performing. I'm going down to Albany imminently, and we've got a plan to go down there and do some performances in the new year. But I do call myself a songwriter-singer. I've already started writing. I've been writing a lot of songs this year, and I've got another song cycle that I'm working on, which is quite intriguing.
Fourth album.
Possibly. I've got a lot more songs than I've released, but what I've done in the past with records is I've gone back over the songs that I've written over a period of time and selected the ones that I think are the best songs, and then work out a way to piece them together to make it a unit. This time I'm actually writing a series of songs that interrelate. So I'm intrigued to see how that goes. And that's beginning to capture that side of my imagination. So
I think you're a person that will always have an element that will always be there, that you'll be working on. I can never see you as a person that'll just be happy with
I've never
what you've done in the past.
No, I've never thought of myself as being, the best thing that happened was being in the very fortunate position of being able to retire, because it's very hard to be seriously creative when you have to work every day and you come home from work and you're knackered and all you really want to do is sit on the couch and watch television. You can't, it's very hard. And I'm in the very fortunate position that because I've worked, I've owned my own home, I don't need to pay any rent, I don't need to pay off a mortgage, so my time is freed up and I've got a bit of super. So, but recording music is not, and working collaboratively with the kind of people I like working with is not, is an expensive process. So
would you, my final question, and this is a really loaded one.
Okay.
I know working in the arts myself can be a difficult thing, and because we feel so emotionally and it really encompasses who we are. If you were saying to a young creative person, what is the biggest advice that you could give them? And I'm not necessarily talking about young people here, but somebody that perhaps has even realised halfway through their life that, I think I've gone down the wrong path and I want to be an artist or a musician or something. What is the biggest word of advice that you could give them?
I mean, it's a really complex question, because I think the timing of the question, the age of the person who's asking it, is the different thing. When I was at the Fringe, when I finished my period at the Fringe, I thought about that very question: what advice, after this experience of working for this organisation in Perth, what advice would I give to someone, a young artist who came up to and asked me as a person who'd had a bit of experience what to do. And my advice to a young person would be, if you're serious about it, get your training here and train diligently to get the skills that you need for your art form. Then get out of here and go to the city in the world that is a centre for the particular art form that you're in. If you're not committed to being in Perth, and you're not committed, you're committed to wanting to be a successful and established artist, get out of here and go to that city somewhere else that's a bigger centre. Because what happens in Perth, and again I'm talking historically, is that traditionally artists would start off in Perth, they'd rise to be the best in Perth. Then okay, we've conquered this one, let's go to Melbourne now. And you go to Melbourne and you might start on the second tier and you've got to build up to the top there. And then, okay, well that's done. We've now covered Australia because we've gone to that centre. So now we go to America and build up that way. And my advice would be, get your training, get your skills together, and then go straight to the centre, which is the one that is the world centre of your art form, and build up there, because then you will get the hardest experience in the real world, and you'll either float or sink and do that, and hopefully you'll rise to the top. If you're committed to Perth, then, it's a very tricky thing. Perth does not support artists. There are very, very, very few people in this city who have lived their whole career as an artist and done well. There are people who have done it. Most of them have ended up teaching as well to support that, which is perfectly fine. But, you can count probably either that, or if in the performing arts they end up being based here and perhaps doing quite a bit of work here, but also getting away and going and working elsewhere at the same time, being of a profile where they can get work in other cities. Visual artists have fared quite a bit better, but as you all know, as a visual artist, it's, often you end up spending most of your time teaching, or you end up working as an administrator or an organiser to pay the bills, and doing something else and doing occasional work. But yeah, if you're committed to Perth though, then that's the price you pay. You stay here, you work out a way to survive, to buy your house, to feed your family and yourself, and you keep creating as best you can. And there's the other thing, that are you creating, of course you don't want to just create and just sit in the corner and, after you die someone says, oh, Uncle Bill had a great, did some interesting work, or pity he didn't go further with that, or it's nice now. But so you want people to actually hear it and see it and engage with it. And it's finding out the best ways of doing that, I guess. But,
thank you for that. That is, I totally agree with you in that one.
Mm.
And I'm really grateful that I've got to chat with you today, because I'm hoping that people will hear our interview and really remember some of the things that we've talked about and understood about creativity.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely talking to you, Julie. You've really made me think about a lot of interesting parts of my life that I haven't put together in quite this format for a long time.
And now that you're in this lovely gallery, we're going to have to get you to...
okay.
You have to promise me that we will hear your...
Yes, okay. Well, you've got the CDs. You could play some of them. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie.
My absolute pleasure, and all the best with everything this year. And they must come and listen to that beautiful music.
Thank you very much.
But the frame of thought and time is etched and grey. And as the cracks at last appear, I strangely sense you very near. Wild hair, raven dark and curling, a wry laugh, piercing pensive eyes, a frame on a road forever changing, a small child without a hand to hold. The memories merge as the years fade by, and like a lost and callow youth, I stumble upon the hollow truth in a photograph. On a sun-drenched afternoon of a gentle friend, in a sweetly shaded room, a failing hologram, flickering in my mind, a broken key, lost in the folds of time. Oh. Of anger, no gain, no deeper truth, but I can sense you now, standing there, on your way to the masquerade, dressed all in black like the Queen of Spades in a photograph. On a sun-drenched afternoon, a gentle friend I won't see again too soon, a failing hologram, flickering in my brain, that the folds of time will never release again. Oh no. Sun-drenched afternoon of a bunch of friends I won't see again too soon.